I think this is my first official screencast, and it's pretty freaky, and I'm nervous, and I think I'm gonna puke, but hopefully I'll get through this. We are going to talk about economic sectors today. Very exciting stuff. So here we go from the beginning. Economic sectors. Remember that this falls under Learning Target 7B, which is to explain the spatial patterns of industrial production and development, and that this is part of Essential Knowledge 7.2.A. There is a video for that on my YouTube channel because I guess I'm a YouTuber now. And the essential knowledge is the different economic sectors, including primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and quinary, are characterized by distinct development patterns. So what does that mean? I guess we're going to find out. So the economic sectors, the easiest way to think of them is in terms of the different types of jobs. We all know of lots of different categories of jobs, and you are going to learn here in just a minute which categories most of the jobs that you're aware of would fall into. The purpose of studying this, the reason that we need to know it at all, is that it helps us start to illustrate a pattern between MDCs and LDCs. Remember, that is something that we have come back to multiple times in this class. So for instance, back in Unit 2, talking about population, we said that LDCs are probably stage 2 and MDCs are probably stage 4 in terms of migration, that people are trying to leave LDCs and head to MDCs, and that when people are migrating in LDCs, they're migrating from rural to urban areas. We've talked about culture as well, folk culture going with LDCs and pop culture going with MDCs. We've talked about agriculture, that subsistence agriculture goes with LDCs and that commercial agriculture goes with MDCs. And now we're going to think about economic and industrial development and how they relate. So here we go. Economic sectors, types of jobs. First one is the primary sector. The primary sector is involved in raw material extraction. So this is any type of job that is involved with working with raw materials or natural goods, natural resources. This could be things like farming. This could be things like mining, things like fishing or forestry, drilling for oil, any type of raw materials that you can think of. The secondary sector, in the simplest terms, is manufacturing, but really what we would say is that the secondary sector is involved with processing things from the primary sector. So for instance, food processing, making food out of those things that the farmers are growing. In terms of mining, processing crude oil, or even something like turning silver or gold or diamonds into jewelry. Things like paper mills, toilet paper, hot topic, coronavirus, anything involved in the processing of primary sector goods. The tertiary sector, or the third sector, is the service sector. This is where we think of a lot of American jobs today, a lot of jobs in MDCs in general. This includes things like sales, things like transportation and distribution. For instance, driving buses or driving trucks or even trains, shipping goods around the world. Entertainment, restaurants, clerical services. Clerical means like secretarial, things like filing, receptionists, various things associated with that. Media, tourism, insurance, banking, healthcare, and the law. And then the tertiary sector is actually subdivided into 2 additional sectors. The quaternary sector, which I realize I messed up on my video. Sorry, I messed up with the spelling. Santa did not just come into my house. We have jingle bells on the door for the dog. Sorry about that. But the quaternary sector is based on intellectual processing and intellectual based jobs, data driven jobs. The intellectual activities include government jobs, culture jobs, higher level entertainment. I'm sorry, I'm laughing at my dog. She's chugging water right now. Anyway, intellectual activities include government based jobs, cultural jobs, uh, libraries, scientific research, education, and information technology. Um, Really, it's just like higher level business type jobs. You can also think of it in terms of creative type jobs. So even like your social media influencers, um, I don't know, artistry in general. I would put like musicians and comedians and actors and people like that in this category. Um, yeah, the creative kind of sector of the population. And then the quinary sector, the highest levels of decision making in a society or an economy, and they include the top executives or officials in such fields as government, science, universities, something behind my screen, Castify, there we go, nonprofit, healthcare, culture, and the media. So the people that you see speaking to you all the time about the coronavirus, those people would be in the quinary sector, your governors, presidents, healthcare officials, and the like. This is a chart showing you 3 different countries and the breakdown of the primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors in those countries. So you can see in the United States that the largest sector for us by far is the tertiary sector. You can see that Brazil is a little bit more equal, I guess, between the 3 categories, and that tertiary is still the largest, but there are quite a few more in the primary sector in Brazil. And then you see in Nepal that the primary sector is the largest sector of the economy and that the secondary sector is actually the smallest. So, really, what that tells us is that the United States is an MDC, that Nepal is certainly an LDC, and that Brazil is probably an emerging economy. Brazil is increasing in the secondary sector, but is not fully, or I'm sorry, Brazil is increasing in the tertiary sector rather, but is still pretty heavily dependent upon the primary sector. And remember, there's a lot of slash and burn agriculture in Brazil. And then we see that Nepal, which is a highly mountainous country, not a lot of industry, maybe not surprising that they are heavily primary. So some basic information about the sectors just quickly. The primary sector is decreasing in LDCs because of increased mechanization, especially in agricultural work. You know that less people are required essentially to complete those tasks. The primary sector is relatively stable in MDCs, and that frankly is because they really can't go much lower in MDCs. The primary sector is already kind of as low as it could be. So if you take a look at this chart, we see on the x-axis, they're demonstrating the year, and it's in 5-year sectors. And then on the y-axis, it's the types of jobs in terms of percentage, and that goes by 10% all the way up. So in 1970, the average MDC had maybe 5% in the primary sector and 40% in the secondary sector and 55% in the tertiary sector. And my dog is playing, so hold that thought. Okay, all in the pursuit of knowledge. No fun for the dog. Looking at the chart again, though, in LDCs, you can see that the primary sector in 1970 was around 20%, and then similarly secondary and tertiary in between 35 to 45%. The secondary sector has decreased sharply in MDCs because of deindustrialization. That's something that we're going to talk about in this unit, that many of the manufacturing jobs in MDCs have actually moved or been outsourced to LDCs, and we'll talk about what that means. There is a lesser percentage of the workforce in MDCs than in LDCs engaged in secondary work. And again, we will talk about what that means. But primarily, a lot of the movement has to do with lower labor costs in LDCs, that you can pay people less in LDCs. The tertiary sector. It is a large percentage of the economy in MDCs, and it continues to grow. It is a growing but much smaller percentage of the economy in LDCs. Remember, even in the lowest income countries in the world, there will be some people in the tertiary sector because all societies need service-based jobs. That's just the nature of the economy in general. The quaternary sector. This is a subtype or subset of the tertiary sector. It continues to increase in MDCs. And again, I mentioned this is like your creative sector. And I don't know what it says about me that PewDiePie is the person that I found for this, but the creative sector, the IT-based sector, internet-based sector in general. It's a subset, a subtype of the tertiary sector. And then lastly, the quinary sector is also a subtype of the tertiary sector. It is relatively limited in size. It's a very small percentage of people. We're talking about elite decision makers. So whether this is government, whether this is like your Bill Gates or your Elon Musks or somebody, in the highest levels of business decision-making processes in general. And again, this kind of wraps up the PowerPoint. Sorry for all the weird background noises, but I guess I successfully completed my first Screencastify. So thank you for being patient, and I miss you guys, and this is weird, and I can't wait to be back at school.